Hello, and welcome to today's edition of the Live and Invest Overseas podcast. Today, I'm Kat Kalashian. I am the Europe editor based here in Paris, France. And today I'm joined by my friend Katie O'Neill, who moved here from the U.S. about a year ago? Over a year?
Yeah, almost a year and a half now.
Okay. So has a bit of experience living in the city now. What's most interesting about Katie's particular situation from an expat perspective is that she's trying out one of the things that we often recommend to expats as a way to kind of dip your toe in the overseas waters. As we always say, you don't need to, jump off a cliff when you do this. It's all very customizable. So if you're not willing to sell your home and your car and everything you own and give it all up and buy a one-way plane ticket overseas, one of the things you can do is rent out your home back home while you try it out overseas, which is exactly what Katie and her husband are doing. And so just tell us a little bit about why you decided to do that. What gave you the idea and how did you come to this solution?
Yeah. So for like a little bit of background, I'm originally from Boise, Idaho.
Okay.
And Boise, if people know, has turned into one of the hottest real estate markets in the country. I think it's the fastest growing city in the nation right now.
Wow.
Or at least it wasn't in last year. So during COVID, we were living with my parents. We just came to visit. We ended up spending 5 months and we ended up buying a house. And then about a month later, I found out we were going to be moving to Paris. So we had this brand new house we had just invested in, and didn't want to sell it right away. So we decided to, with COVID, we decided to just sort of like leave it empty for a while. But then as we decided to stay in Paris a little bit more long term, I started looking into, okay, I don't really want to be paying rent in two places. I can't afford to be paying rent in two places.
Yeah.
I'm not working. So what are some things I can do to sort of try to make our mortgage back home?
Mm-hmm.
So that's sort of like what prompted the search for someone who can help us manage our house and like hopefully get some of our income back.
Right. And this is the ideal situation, of course, where you are assuming, I'm assuming most people are paying a mortgage. And hopefully the rental income that you can make off the home will offset that mortgage payment. So it's kind of just a net zero event back home while you try out this new lifestyle overseas. So remind us why you were in Paris at all. What gave you guys the idea to come try out overseas living for a while?
Yeah, so my husband has been working for the same company for like 10 years, and they have their headquarters in Paris. It's a French company. Mm-hmm. And I was finally like, why are we not living in Paris? So I kind of was the one who was pushing for that. And so he finally applied for I think it's 1 to 5 years stint. So we don't actually know how long we'll stay here.
Wow. Okay. So yeah, even more, I guess the uncertainty there is another great reason to be trying to do this if you didn't want to backpedal with that house all the way. All right. So again, this is kind of one of the ways to get overseas a little bit faster than you might normally because you don't need to wait around selling your car, selling your home or anything. And so it's kind of a almost turnkey way to try out living overseas, whether it's Paris or Panama or Mexico or wherever in the world you might think about trying out. So as I said, the ideal is that you can break even on the mortgage payments through the rental income, if not earn some extra cash. So that's the theory. How is that working out in practice?
Well, I wouldn't say that we're breaking even.
Okay.
But like the additional wrinkle for us is that we also have a baby. And so I was on maternity leave and I still am not working. So we went from having two incomes, one rent / mortgage to one income, two mortgages. So while it doesn't quite break even, I think we're pretty close.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And so how do you deal with the preparation, or how did you deal with the preparation of a house? I mean, I know from my family's experience renting out homes overseas, you don't always want all of your personal belongings, all of your furniture that you might have sentimental attachments to or just not want to be ruined or stolen or broken or whatever it is. So how much preparation did you guys do to make it rental ready?
So I sort of decided, okay, what would be my ideal? My ideal is I keep all my furniture. And then when I go back to the US for 1 or 2 weeks a year, I get to live in my house with all my furniture. So I decided to start from there and see what was possible. So I also, because we're in France, there's no way I want to be managing this with the time change if there's like a leak or something. So the first thing I did was I went to find a property manager. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if you want me to talk about that now.
Or... Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So some people had given us recommendations of companies to use for property management, and I was a little bit hesitant because it's a very old house. It was built in like 1900.
That's amazing.
You know, it needs like it needs a little bit of care, and it's in a historical district of the city. And so I eventually just looked on Google Maps and I typed in property manager, and I found a woman in the neighborhood, and she said, "Oh, I don't actually manage furnished rentals, but I'll give you the name of another woman." So I feel extremely, extremely lucky because she takes care of everything, and she charges, I think, 7 or 8%. So I think very reasonable.
Okay, yeah.
And she came. We only had 2 days to sort this out. We were in the U.S. and she came and did a walkthrough. And I said, "Okay, here's where the sheets are. You know, my husband redid the bathtub, so you can't use any sort of abrasives on it." You know, I kind of just gave her the whole rundown. And then she said, "Okay, anything you want locked away." She said, "I'll see what I can get with a furnished rental. If you end up needing to take out the furniture, we can talk about that later." So she said, "Anything you don't want broken, stolen, etc., figure out a place to put it." So we did have to do some preparation. We bought some new locks. My husband installed a new, like, sort of like a sliding door down in like near the laundry room, so we could put things. We have a bunch of watercolors that my grandpa had painted that I put down there. Mm-hmm. So it's tough because you're striking a balance between you want it to be warm and welcoming, but you don't want all your stuff. Right. Like I had a harp that I had to move.
You wouldn't want that out, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a toy when it's just left out.
And we even, I mean, it's tough because you don't really know what a renter is looking for. Like, do they really want garage space? They can't have garage space at our house because we are leaving our car in the garage.
And actually, that was my next question. Yeah. So you left the car in the garage and you've just locked that away and it's off limits. Yep. Okay, that's one way to deal with it.
You know, and it's tough because who's taking care of the yard? So we had to set up we had to have a lawn service person like on standby. Okay. I had to have a cleaning person. I typed up a whole like, here's how to use the heater, here's how to use all these things, and I like pinned it on the fridge. Sort of like you would see it like an Airbnb. Yeah. Because we're so far away. And so that's kind of like the prep I did, just, you know, deep cleaning, all these things, just kind of making sure that it was as neutral as possible. Mm-hmm. There is one room I think that still has like all these photos of me running. I feel like it's charming, but I don't know. And then the property manager, you know, it was all very fast, and she kind of took it from there. So she texts me if she has questions, and yeah.
And do the renters have her info? Like, is she on standby for them as well?
She's the point of contact.
Okay, renters. All right. So she basically is property and rental manager. She's
it's amazing.
Both. Yeah, that is amazing because this is something to know. There is a distinct a distinction between a rental manager and a property manager. If you can find them both and they do both jobs really well, more power to you. My family has rented out houses in many countries, and you can't always find the person to do both jobs. And so you might end up having to hire 2 different people, one to manage things like the lawn work, the cleaning, the making sure that your list of valuables is still there after every renter leaves. But then you might have to hire a separate person to actually go out and find you renters and be the point of contact for those renters and do the turnover every week. Mm-hmm. So good for you.
I didn't actually know that. And I think, if I were to like say one thing I was really happy about is that I found someone a little bit less traditional. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't always get paid exactly at the start of the month, but she's dealt with some like horrible tenants, and she like went and bought us a new oven at Home Depot.
Oh, wow.
You know,
that's
like
a big one.
So it's very much like I can trust her to actually like take care of our home.
Right. And that's what you want, especially considering a massive time difference. Yes. There could be an entire day where you're unable to be in contact with anyone there, and you want somebody who you can really empower to trust and to say, all right, you know, I'm going to say that you have to go to Home Depot and you have to pick the oven. Here are your guidelines, but I'm going to trust you to do it without, you know, being on a FaceTime call, looking at the options in Home Depot with you.
Yeah.
All right, great. Well, it sounds like there was some prep involved, but it sounds like you have a really good manager there. You've mentioned multiple tenants, so you've had short-term renters.
Yeah, I think it's tougher with it being furnished.
And
because, as I mentioned, Boise's like such a hot real estate market, no one really is looking to rent right now. They're all looking to buy, especially not at the price point that we want to rent.
Right.
So I think she started out, our ideal would have been like 3 or 4 months. She has a lot of like rules, our property manager. She says she doesn't like to keep someone for longer than 6 months in case they're really bad tenants.
Okay.
With a furnished rental. I think it's
could
different
see,
if it's unfurnished.
Yeah.
And because we were coming back and forth a little bit, so maybe we want to use the house. So she found some people like 3 or 4 months at a time, and I think it was a little bit slow just on Craigslist or whatever sites she uses. So now she's using Airbnb, which is a whole different ball game. But again, I'm very hands off. I say, do what you need to do. And so I think she's been finding like months at a time.
All right. So there are pros and cons to that, obviously. I think a lot of people, the ideal is a long-term renter because I guess once they've been vetted, once you're sure that they're a decent tenant, you don't want to have to think about it. You don't want to have to think about the ins and the outs and the cleaning every time, which is another expense if you're going to have people in and out. But if, like Katie, you want to go back home and use your home, then that's a major thing to take into account. And basically then your only option is these short-term lets. And the more flexibility you want in going back, the more flexible you're going to have to be with those terms. So if you're only going to go back once a year, you could maybe feasibly do a 6-month tenant. But if you don't really know, then month to month works really well. So again, pros and cons. Think about what your goal is, what your ideal scenario is for this.
And I would add, Kat, I think like one thing that was really helpful is we sat down. Again, this was very fast, but we sat down with the property manager and I said, "Here are my priorities."
Yeah, and that's a great thing.
So money isn't like the top priority. The top priority is having like good tenants, even if it's at a lower price point. And Dave and I both think that the house is better being lived in case there's an issue.
Sure.
So like we want good tenants. Yeah. So therefore pets are negotiable. And then it's about duration, and then it's about money. So it's like we want good tenants for as long as possible, for as much as possible. Yeah.
So this is a great, actually, that's a really, really good thing to do. I'm all about the lists in my personal life. I live my life by checklist. But this is also advice that we give to you about practically every aspect of living overseas is to create a priority list and know what your deal breakers are, and then don't budge on them. Yeah. Don't be convinced, if you're allergic to cats, and you said no cats, don't let her, don't let the rental manager convince you that this great tenant should be allowed in, even if they have a cat.
We did allow cats, and when we went back in December, we had horrible allergies.
Yeah, so something to keep in mind. And as Katie said, she's very hands-off, and that is a decision, that's a choice you can make. But I would go out on a limb and say, if you're going to do this, you need to be able to turn that part of your brain off and forget about it and let them do their job and let the house be lived in. Maybe, and you might discover that you wanted to maybe go back and visit your house, but you can't stand it being lived in by other people.
Yeah.
And you don't want to go back anymore. This has actually happened to my mother. She was renting out my childhood home here in Paris. It is occasionally rented out to long-term renters for a year or more at a time. She came back after one renter had left, and the renter thought she was doing this really nice thing by leaving all of her plants. And she had kind of turned the living room into a bit of a hothouse. I mean, it was extensive, the levels of planting that she did. And my mother walked in, and she thought it looked like, I don't know, like, I can't even say.
There's that sentimentality
like an outdoor, right. Like it looked like some kind of outdoor market or something. And for her, this is her home that, she raised her kids in.
Yeah.
And she immediately just walked right out, called the rental manager and said, get all of that out. And I'm not returning until it's gone. And everything is back the way it is. And that's her number one priority is making sure that when she walks into her home, she cannot tell that anyone has ever been there. So, but again, I think there's a benefit to just turning yourself off to it all and not trying to get involved, not trying to micromanage everything, because especially when it is your home that you have some sentimental attachments to, it's very hard to be hands off.
Yeah. And I think I always just have the attitude, things are going to go wrong.
Of course.
And nothing's irreversible.
That's a great attitude.
And that's with life too,
right?
But I really had to apply it to this renting. And at first it was my husband who was going to manage everything, and I'm the one that managed.
Yeah. For me, I wouldn't be able to hand that off to him. I would have to be involved in it. So.
I thought it would be too stressful, because I'm the one that has more sentimental attachment, and I'm just doing it.
So speaking, while we're on the topic of doing it, how much it is there? So how many hours per week or per month do you think you actually end up dealing with any of it?
Not very much. Honestly, I don't think about it on a day-to-day basis. I probably hear from the property manager like once or twice a month.
It's pretty good.
She, like I said, I trust her. And it's one of those where I sort of had to go out on a limb because at one point we had this nightmare tenant and the tenant broke the oven and the property manager, was driving all around and I just had to wire her $1,500.
I hope for the best.
I'm hoping I'm going to get some of that back, but I don't know. And, but I wouldn't say, at least for me, it's been very minimal, less than an hour a month.
Oh, great.
Average. Yeah. But I could see it being more or less depending on.
Absolutely. Right. And that goes down to how much you trust your property manager, how much you empower them to work on your behalf. And of course, if you end up with really bad people not doing a great job, which is I'm surprised that you've only had a good experience with rental managers because they can be some of the biggest issues when it comes to doing this. We've gone through a number of people in a number of countries. If you trial and error, you may end up in a bad scenario with one of your rental or property managers. You may have to find some more, but once you do find that person that can be your advocate, whom you really do trust, I think it should be that kind of level of administration. It should be an hour a month. It shouldn't be anything that you're actually thinking about or keeping you awake at night, certainly. So I wanted to ask about horror stories. I guess you had this one terrible tenant so far.
Well, so I guess I have two. One of them was back in October, and we got an email from our next door neighbor, and she went outside and saw these youths vandalizing a street sign on Halloween night, and she went out and said, "Hey, what are you doing?" And then she said they all ran into our house, and so this was the email we got from our next door neighbor, and so that was very stressful. Right. That's probably the last thing you want to hear. It's from a third party.
Yeah. And that your reputation in the neighborhood.
Yes, exactly. The reputation in the neighborhood and all this. And the neighbor said they had left like a case of Truly and a bunch of cases of cigarettes. And so then we're worried about smoking, and then my mind starts going on all these things.
It's now a frat house.
Yeah, so I emailed the property manager immediately, and she was on it. She was actually in the middle of having surgery. Like, we found a really great woman, and she said, I'm going to call the tenant right away, and I'm going to request a walkthrough, and I'm just going to say I need to make sure the house is okay and all these things. And it was very bizarre because the tenant said, I don't know what you're talking about. Does someone else have a key? And
it's crazy.
Very weird. Yeah. The house was fine. And, I think the story is the tenant has a 14-year-old daughter. And the tenant was out of town that weekend.
Well, then there you go.
Yeah.
So very cut and dry. Once you
I think the story she told us was different than the story she told them. But I think that was probably, at least that one was the most stressful for me.
Yeah, I imagine.
But then more recently, and this is just like big headache. This is where the property manager actually had to bring me in. We had a tenant who was staying for 2 months and, wanted to use the fireplace. And I don't really have a problem with that, but I have no idea how to use the fireplace. We've never used it. So I sort of said no. And then she was really upset. And then she turned on the oven cleaner, which I think I've never even done that with an oven. I think it's like pretty, and I guess it like blew up the whole oven, and then it was on like the house was unlivable. And then she said her only goal was to learn to bake bread during this time. She was really like, and so the property manager was trying to manage this woman as well. And it was just, the woman ended up leaving. We had to work with Airbnb to refund her and the property manager. And I ended up paying the property manager extra for just like dealing with this woman. But it was something where I had to, property manager doesn't have like cash on hand to buy a new oven. I have no idea how much a new oven costs. as I said, the area is growing so fast that you can't actually get it up in sooner than like 4 weeks.
Oh my God.
So I was looking into like buying like a little toaster oven, and in the end, we just decided good riddance because
That woman's a nightmare anyway.
She was such, she just didn't have any grace about it. But and then you don't know, once someone's unhappy and they're staying in your house, you worry like they're not treating it well,
right.
And so that was something where I did have to be involved, and it was stressful. But at the end of the day, I kept telling myself, you know what, like if she burns up the couch, like I'll just have to buy a new couch, that's part of the reason we're renting this out is like to have that income, and it comes with a cost a little bit.
Right.
So I would say other than that, things have been pretty good.
Okay. But I mean, it just goes to show there are always going to be the horror stories, they're always going to be, something's always going to go wrong. And it is, all about how you deal with it and about how you've prepared yourself and prepared the situation back home. So having the rental manager, etc. So, do you see any eventuality where you would end up not going back to live in your home? I mean, I guess your scenario is different probably from many of our readers and watchers and listeners, who are retired for the most part. And so I guess for them, it would be more of a goal, perhaps in some cases, to end up selling it while gone. Your hope is to keep it though and move back.
For now, I mean, you never know what's gonna happen. I love living here.
Yeah.
So, if I do find a job and I want to stay longer, then I would want to have that option. So, yeah, there is an eventuality in which maybe we would try to like sell it, but I haven't really thought about that.
It's not a part of your plan right now.
Yeah, I think the thing that might be part of our plan would be to put our furniture in storage if we end up staying a little bit more.
Okay, that's a good point because you took the route where you basically just kept all of your furniture, which is definitely the easiest and cheapest and most turnkey way to go. But if you are much more sentimentally attached to your belongings, I am guilty of this. I put sentimental value into everything. My mother is the same way. You end up basically refurnishing a house. Or, I mean, you can also rent it unfurnished, which it sounds like in some cases might be preferential. It sounds like it might be easier in some markets to rent an unfurnished home. But if short-term rental is what you're looking for, if you do want that flexibility of going back to your home, then you're going to need to have it furnished. And that could mean going out to buy a bunch of IKEA furniture or something and replacing everything and then paying the cost of storage. Fun fact, did you know that the average length of time that anyone owns a storage unit is 3 years? No matter how long they say, I'm only going to have it for a month, 6 months tops. And in almost every case, the average is 3 years. And for me, that was the case. We moved from Panama. We left a bunch of books there that we couldn't bring back. And because of COVID, I'm going to blame it on COVID, we couldn't get back to get those books and close the unit out until last month, which we're very happy about. So that's another few $100s a year that you save.
I would also say in terms of like, when you said few $100s, there's also if you're doing unfurnished versus furnished, and short-term versus long-term, there's also the utilities.
Oh, yes.
And the internet and stuff. So like, that's something that we've still been managing our own. The property manager doesn't manage the utilities. It's still linked to our bank account. And I mean, we had one tenant who was streaming video 24 hours a day, and we had to like buy a higher Wi-Fi.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I don't know what she was doing. I think she was
day trading or something.
No, I think it was like background music on YouTube or something.
Okay.
That's a lot of it. That's something that I think people might forget to think about, and
it's something I forgot to think about.
Yeah, and like recycling and who's mowing the lawn.
Yeah,
and so we have a little cadre of people who go.
Yeah, well, and that's what you end up doing. You have your little coterie of people who come in and help you out with all this stuff. So would you, on the whole, recommend this as a strategy for people, especially retirees, thinking of it in terms of the lens of being a retired person wanting to try out overseas?
Oh, I think anything that's going to help you move overseas, do it. Like, I'm so pro experiencing new cultures. I would say, I mean, I'm an N of one. I only have this one experience, but it wasn't necessarily as lucrative as I had hoped.
Right.
I had hoped, maybe we'll even make a profit.
Yeah, that's what we always hope. Yeah.
And it's not quite meeting our mortgage. So it's definitely still helpful. But, the lower and lower we go, or like the more costs accrue, then, it ends up being a little bit more of a trade-off.
Right.
So it might be worth it to do a little bit of market research depending on where you live.
Right. No, because I was going to say it definitely depends on the market. If that's not a renting town, then that's going to make it all the harder. If you have an apartment in Manhattan, you're never going to want for renters.
Yeah.
So it really depends on the city you're in. If you're in a more rural area versus a more metropolitan area. So yeah, great point. Look up average rentals in your area and compare that against the cost of your mortgage. And hopefully for retirees, their mortgage would be more negligible at that point. Do you think that it would be more suitable as an option for certain people versus other people? Like, would you say, like, if you're a very type A kind of person, maybe this isn't for you?
Yeah, I mean, if you're highly anxious and you want to know the ins and outs all the time. So, for instance, my parents actually have a house very close to our house that we're renting. And my mom would call me and she would say, I saw a bunch of people with a dog go into your house the other day. And I finally had to tell her, that's stressful for me to hear. I don't want to be imagining this. Yeah. So if you're the type of person who wants to be hearing all the ins and outs, maybe this isn't for you. Because, when someone's renting your house, you have to remember it's their house.
Yeah.
And they might invite friends over. They might have different standards.
Party.
They might put their feet on the couch. They might not vacuum as often. And so I think that's something that you have to be willing to let go of a little bit.
Yeah. I definitely, I think the same thing. I don't think that I would be necessarily cut out for it. But there's, many different ways to do this as well. So, if you think that maybe this isn't the right strategy for you, there are many other ways to get overseas. But it's been great to talk to you about this. Do you have any final words, any parting wisdom?
No, I just think throughout this whole experience, I've realized there's not one right way of doing it. And I think advocating for yourself is really important.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of experts out there.
Absolutely.
And at the end of the day, it's your home.
It's your home.
And you get to make the calls.
Yeah. And all of these are your decisions. That's why we always say, create that priority list and know what your deal breakers are, and then don't budge on them, because a million people will try and convince you of something else. And you need to know where to draw that line in the sand. All right. Well, thanks so much for coming to talk to me today, Katie.
Anytime, Kat.
I was Kat Kalashian for the Live and Invest Overseas podcast. For more wisdom on all things to do with living and investing overseas, sign up for the Overseas Opportunity Letter. It's a free daily newsletter. If you're particularly interested in real estate and investing advice, such as what we've been talking about today, you might also be interested in Overseas Property Alert, another free weekly newsletter that comes just chock full of renting and investing and buying overseas information. Thank you, and we'll talk again soon. Bye.